My name is Natalie Wilson. I'm 29 years old, and until 6 months ago, I thought I had the perfect marriage. 5 years with Jason, and I never imagined it would end because of a glass of wine and a punch that changed everything. One moment, I was sitting at my in-laws' dinner table, and the next, I was watching my father-in-law's hand connect with my face while my husband just sat there. When Jason finally spoke, his words shattered my world. Apologize or leave. So I left. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know where you're watching from and hit subscribe if you've ever had to choose between your self-respect and someone you love. Jason and I met at a coffee shop near my office in downtown Seattle. I was working on a freelance project, headphones on, completely in my zone when someone tapped my shoulder. I looked up, annoyed at the interruption, to find the most gorgeous blue eyes I'd ever seen. Jason was holding my wallet, which had fallen out of my bag without me noticing. "I think this belongs to you," he said with a smile that made me forget why I was annoyed in the first place. I thanked him, and he asked if he could join me. We ended up talking for 3 hours. I missed 2 meetings, but I didn't care. Jason was smart, funny, and seemed genuinely interested in my work as a graphic designer. He didn't just nod along like most guys did when I talked about typography and color theory. He asked questions. He worked as a financial analyst at his father's investment firm and had just been promoted to team lead. Our relationship moved quickly after that. Within 6 months, we were practically living together, and after a year and a half, he proposed during a weekend trip to Vancouver. The wedding was beautiful, not too big, not too small. My sister Lauren was my maid of honor, and Jason's college roommate Caleb was his best man. We bought a beautiful apartment in a trendy neighborhood. With a spare room we planned to turn into a nursery someday. My career was taking off too. I had started at a small marketing agency and worked my way up to senior graphic designer within 3 years. My clients loved my work, and I was even considering opening my own studio eventually. Jason was supportive of my ambitions, always bragging about my creativity to our friends. We hosted dinner parties regularly, inviting couples we were close with. Madison and Caleb, who had introduced us, often commented on how perfectly matched we seemed. "You guys never even fight," Madison said once, wine glass in hand. Jason and I exchanged smiles. It was true, we rarely disagreed, and when we did, we worked through it quickly. The first sign of trouble came when I met Jason's parents, Frank and Diane Wilson. Frank was a self-made businessman who had built Wilson Financial from the ground up. Now in his early 60s, he had the commanding presence of someone used to being obeyed. Diane was his opposite, quiet, elegant, and perpetually anxious about keeping Frank happy. Our first dinner at their sprawling lakeside mansion was tense. Frank dominated the conversation, grilling me about my family background, education, and career in a way that felt more like an interview than getting to know his son's girlfriend. "Graphic design," he said, swirling expensive scotch in his crystal glass. "Is there actually money in that, or is it more of a hobby?" I explained that it was a legitimate career with good earning potential, especially in tech-centered Seattle. Frank nodded dismissively. "Well, at least Jason makes enough that you can switch to something more stable when you have kids." I glanced at Jason, expecting him to correct his father's assumption that I would give up my career, but he just smiled uncomfortably and changed the subject. In the car on the way home, I mentioned how disrespectful Frank's comment had been. "That's just how Dad is," Jason said with a shrug. "He's from a different generation. Don't take it personally." That became a pattern. Frank would make subtly demeaning comments about my career, my clothes, even my opinions on current events, and Jason would excuse it as just how Dad is. Diane would sit silently, occasionally shooting me apologetic glances, but never contradicting her husband. My friend Madison noticed the dynamic after a barbecue where both our families attended. "Your father-in-law is intense," she said carefully. "And Jason seems to really care about his approval." "He's just respectful of his parents," I defended, but Madison's observation lingered. "Just be careful," she said. "Caleb says Frank has a reputation for being controlling. Makes a lot of enemies in business." I brushed it off. Every family has its quirks, right? Besides, Jason was nothing like his father. He was gentle, considerate, and treated me as an equal. Or so I thought. Looking back, I should have paid attention to how Jason's demeanor changed around his father. The confident man I knew became almost childlike in Frank's presence, eager for approval and quick to agree with whatever opinion Frank expressed. At the time, I found it odd but not alarming. If only I had recognized these early warning signs for what they were. But when you're in love, you make excuses. You rationalize. You ignore the red flags waving right in front of your face, because acknowledging them would mean admitting that your perfect life might not be so perfect after all. And our life really did seem perfect to everyone looking in. The successful young couple with promising careers, a beautiful home, and a strong marriage. Instagram-worthy vacations and dinner parties with friends. I truly believed we were building something special together. How could I have known that it would all come crashing down over a spilled glass of wine? As months passed into years, Frank's behavior toward me grew increasingly critical. What started as subtle digs evolved into open criticism. During a Thanksgiving dinner in our second year of marriage, Frank spent 10 minutes lecturing me about my choice of centerpiece, explaining why my artistic sensibilities were impractical and attention-seeking. A proper table setting should be elegant but subtle, he informed me while Diane nodded beside him. All this modern nonsense with wildflowers and mismatched candles looks like something from a college dorm. I had spent hours creating that centerpiece, incorporating elements that represented both Jason's family and mine. Jason, instead of defending my efforts, quickly offered to replace it with something more traditional from his mother's collection. Then there was the Christmas when Frank scrutinized my gift to Jason, a custom-designed watch with our wedding date engraved on the back. Seems like a waste of money when he already has several high-quality timepieces, Frank commented, barely looking at the watch that had cost me 3 weeks' salary and months of planning. But I suppose it's the thought that counts. When I landed a major client at work and shared the news at a family dinner, Frank immediately asked if I was prepared for that level of responsibility and suggested Jason look over the contract before I signed anything. I had been managing similar clients for years. Each time, Jason either remained silent or actively took his father's side. "Dad's just trying to help," he would explain later. "He wants what's best for us." Diane was no better. Her way of handling Frank's behavior was to smooth things over with platitudes. Frank just wants everyone to succeed, or that's just how he shows he cares, or my personal favorite, men in this family have strong opinions. It's a sign of respect that he's so involved. I tried multiple times to discuss the situation with Jason. We'd get home from these uncomfortable encounters, and I'd gently bring up how undermined I felt. "I feel like your dad doesn't respect me, and it hurts when you don't stand up for me," I said after a particularly difficult Easter lunch where Frank had questioned my competence when I mentioned a promotion I was being considered for. "You don't understand our family dynamics," Jason replied defensively. "Dad pushed me to excel my whole life. That's why I'm successful. He's just trying to do the same for you." There's a difference between pushing someone to excel and constantly criticizing them, I countered. "You're being too sensitive. Dad speaks directly, it's his way of showing he cares." These conversations became so predictable that I eventually stopped having them. Instead, I began withdrawing, becoming quieter at family gatherings and making excuses to miss some of them altogether. Jason noticed and was unhappy about it. "They're my family, Natalie. You need to make more of an effort." Meanwhile, Jason was spending more time with his parents, golfing with Frank on weekends, having lunch with them during workdays, calling Diane almost daily. Our own relationship was suffering. We had sex less frequently, our conversations became superficial, and I found myself keeping my thoughts and feelings to myself rather than sharing them with my husband. My sister Lauren became my confidant. Unlike Madison, who encouraged me to try harder with the in-laws, Lauren saw the unhealthy dynamic immediately. "This isn't normal, Nat," she said during one of our sister nights when Jason was at a business dinner with Frank. "A husband should have your back, especially against his own family." "It's complicated," I defended weakly. "Frank built the company Jason works for. Their relationship is important for his career. More important than your marriage? Lauren asked, her eyebrows raised. I didn't have an answer for that. The pressure intensified when Frank and Diane began asking about grandchildren. It started as casual mentions. Diane showing me baby clothes she'd seen while shopping, or Frank commenting on a colleague whose son had already given them 3 grandchildren. But it quickly became a regular topic of conversation. You're not getting any younger, Natalie, Frank remarked during a Sunday brunch. Women in your field can work from home, can't they? No reason to delay starting a family. Jason and I had agreed to wait at least 5 years before having children. We both wanted to advance in our careers first, and I had health considerations that made pregnancy complicated. But when I reminded Jason of our plan, he seemed less certain. Maybe Dad has a point. We're financially stable. Why wait? It felt like Frank was inserting himself into the most intimate aspects of our marriage, and Jason was allowing it, even encouraging it. My anxiety before family gatherings grew to the point where I developed migraines or stomach issues. Jason accused me of exaggerating to avoid his parents. The distance between us widened. Still, I tried. For Jason, I kept showing up to the monthly formal dinners at Frank and Diane's mansion, a tradition Frank insisted upon to maintain family bonds. These dinners had elaborate protocols, formal attire required, cocktails at 6, dinner at 7, specific topics of conversation deemed appropriate. Frank at the head of the table, Diane at the foot, Jason and I on either side. Crystal glasses, fine china, and enough tension to suffocate in. It was at one of these dinners that everything fell apart. The dinner was to celebrate Frank and Diane's 35th wedding anniversary. Jason was particularly anxious about making a good impression, reminding me repeatedly about the dress code and the importance of being on time. I wore a navy blue cocktail dress that I knew Diane would approve of and pearl earrings that had been a gift from her last Christmas, one of her rare gestures of kindness. We arrived at the mansion at 5:55 p.m., but Jason still fretted that we were cutting it close. The house was imposing as always, a 7,000-square-foot lakeside property with manicured gardens and a 3-car garage housing Frank's collection of luxury vehicles. A housekeeper greeted us at the door and took our coats while Jason straightened his tie for the 3rd time since we'd parked. There you are, Frank called from the living room, crystal tumbler of scotch already in hand. His eyes swept over me critically. Natalie, that dress is a bit casual for an anniversary celebration, isn't it? I think she looks beautiful, Dad, Jason said, but his voice lacked conviction. You're late, Frank continued, checking his Rolex, although we were still 5 minutes early by any normal standard. Traffic on the bridge, Jason explained quickly. Won't happen again. Diane floated in wearing a designer dress that probably cost more than my monthly salary. You both look lovely, she said, air-kissing my cheek. Come have a drink. Frank's opening a special bottle of wine for dinner. The living room was decorated with fresh flowers and photographs from Frank and Diane's wedding and life together. I complimented the arrangements, and Diane smiled genuinely for once. 35 years, Frank announced, raising his glass. That's commitment. You young people could learn something about sticking things out through tough times. I bit my tongue, accepting a glass of champagne from the housekeeper. Jason immediately engaged his father in conversation about work, specifically the promotion he'd recently received to senior financial analyst. It wasn't really a promotion so much as a title change that Frank had orchestrated, but Jason spoke about it as if he'd competed against others for the position. Natalie, Diane said, drawing me away from the men, how is your little design job going? My position as senior graphic designer is going well, I corrected gently. Actually, I just finished a major rebrand for a tech startup that's getting a lot of positive attention. How nice, she said vaguely. Though I always thought you'd have moved on to something more substantial by now. Especially with starting a family soon. Before I could respond that we had no immediate plans for children, the housekeeper announced dinner was ready. We moved to the formal dining room where the table was set with what I recognized as their finest china and crystal. The sets reserved for very special occasions. Frank took his time describing the wine he'd selected, a rare vintage from a small French vineyard. Almost impossible to get in the States, he boasted as the housekeeper poured. Cost more than most people's monthly rent, but some things are worth the investment. I nodded politely, acutely aware of the expensive liquid in my glass and Frank's eyes tracking every movement I made. The first course was served. A delicate seafood appetizer that Frank commented was probably too sophisticated for Natalie's palate. The conversation turned to Jason's department at work. Frank had apparently overridden Jason's hiring decision for a new analyst position. Jason wanted to hire a young woman straight out of college. Frank explained to Diane as if I wasn't there. Had to explain to him that client relations requires gravitas. We went with Bill Peterson's son instead. Jason looked down at his plate. Dad made the right call, he said. I was thinking too progressively. I felt a flare of disappointment. The candidate Jason had originally wanted to hire was exceptionally qualified, with internships at top firms. He'd been excited about bringing fresh perspectives to his team. Now he was endorsing Frank's obvious nepotism. I thought Caroline had really impressive qualifications, I said carefully. Frank's eyes narrowed. Office dynamics are more complex than you'd understand from your creative environment, Natalie. In proper corporate settings, certain standards must be maintained. The implied criticism hung in the air. I took a sip of the exorbitantly priced wine, trying to calm my nerves. Frank turned the conversation to my recent freelance project, information Jason must have shared with him. Designing websites for a friend's catering business? Isn't that a step down from your agency work? Frank asked with feigned concern. It's not a step down, I explained. Amy is expanding her business and needed a complete brand overhaul. I'm helping her as both a friend and a professional. Frank said dismissively. Sounds like hobby work. I'd be concerned if I were you, Jason. Stability is important in a marriage. My hands were trembling slightly with suppressed anger. I reached for a dinner roll, needing something to do besides respond to Frank's belittling comments. What happened next seems both like slow motion and a blur in my memory. My sleeve caught the base of my wine glass as I extended my arm. I felt the resistance, tried to correct, but it was too late. The glass tipped, sending a wave of deep red wine across the pristine white tablecloth. I gasped, immediately grabbing my napkin, but the damage was spreading rapidly toward Frank. Before I could even apologize, Frank leapt up with surprising agility for his age, but not before the wine splashed onto his cream-colored dress shirt and what he had earlier informed us was a $5,000 suit jacket. You clumsy, incompetent girl, he shouted, his face contorting with rage. And then it happened. Frank's right hand swung out and connected with my cheek with enough force to snap my head to the side. The sharp sound of the slap echoed in the suddenly silent dining room. For a moment, nobody moved. My hand went to my stinging face, tears springing to my eyes from both pain and shock. Diane sat frozen, her napkin suspended halfway to her lips. The housekeeper who had been entering with the main course quickly retreated. But it was Jason's face I sought. My husband, the man who had vowed to love and protect me, sat wide-eyed and immobile. He wasn't looking at me, but at his father, in what appeared to be embarrassment mixed with, was that fear? Dad, he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. But he didn't continue. Didn't defend me. Didn't express outrage. Frank straightened his ruined jacket, looking down at me with contempt. Look what you made me do, he said, as if I had been the one to strike him. I pushed back from the table, tears now flowing freely down my face. Without a word, I stood and walked as steadily as I could manage to the nearest bathroom, locking the door behind me. My reflection showed a red mark blooming on my left cheek. I couldn't believe what had just happened. My father-in-law had hit me, actually struck me across the face over spilled wine. And Jason had sat there, saying nothing. A soft knock came at the door. Natalie? It's Diane. Are you all right? I didn't answer, but she persisted until I reluctantly unlocked the door. She slipped in, closing it behind her, and offered a cold washcloth for my face. I'm so sorry that happened, she said, her voice low. Frank is just very particular about his things. The suit was custom-made in Italy. I stared at her in disbelief. He hit me, Diane. Over clothes. She looked down, fidgeting with her wedding ring. He has a temper. He doesn't mean anything by it. It's just his way. His way is to hit women when he's angry? I asked incredulously. Diane didn't answer directly. You should come back to the table. The salmon will get cold, and Frank hates waste. That's when I realized the depth of dysfunction I had married into. Diane wasn't just enabling Frank's behavior, she was so deeply conditioned by it that she saw nothing fundamentally wrong with what had just occurred. I faced a choice: walk out immediately or return to the table and preserve some semblance of dignity by getting through the dinner. Foolishly, I chose the latter, thinking Jason and I would leave immediately after and finally have the conversation we needed to have about his parents. When I returned, everyone was seated as if nothing had happened. The wine had been cleaned up, fresh glasses poured, and Frank was cutting into a salmon, describing its origin to a subdued Jason. There she is, Frank said without looking up. Let's continue, shall we? Not a word of apology. Not a hint of remorse. And still, Jason said nothing. I took my seat, unable to eat, pushing food around my plate while conversation resumed around me. Frank discussed the stock market. Diane inquired about a colleague's wife. Jason responded appropriately to his parents' prompts. I remained silent, feeling like I had entered some bizarre parallel universe where assault at the dinner table was perfectly acceptable behavior. The longest hour of my life crept by. When dessert was finally cleared, I whispered to Jason that I wanted to leave. We can't go yet, he muttered. Dad always has brandy in the study after dinner. Just a little longer. Your father hit me, I whispered fiercely. I want to go home. Now. Jason glanced nervously at Frank, who was watching our exchange with narrowed eyes. Fine, he conceded. I'll make our excuses. The drive home was initially silent. I hugged myself, staring out the passenger window, waiting for Jason to say something, anything, that would indicate he recognized the severity of what had happened. That he was on my side. When we were about halfway home, he finally spoke. You shouldn't have reached across the table like that. You know how Dad is about his possessions. I turned to him slowly, unable to comprehend what I was hearing. Excuse me? That suit was custom-made. It meant a lot to him. Jason, I said, my voice shaking, your father hit me. He physically struck me over an accident. He overreacted, Jason admitted. But you embarrassed him on his anniversary. I embarrassed him? The volume of my voice made Jason flinch. I was assaulted at dinner, and you're concerned about your father's feelings? You're being dramatic. It wasn't assault. He hit me across the face. It wasn't that hard, Jason said dismissively. More of a tap, really. You're making it sound worse than it was. I fell silent, truly seeing my husband for the first time. This man would never stand up to his father. He would always prioritize Frank's feelings, Frank's reputation, Frank's needs over mine, even over my physical safety. When we arrived home, Jason delivered his ultimatum. You need to apologize to him, or this isn't going to work. Apologize. I repeated. For what? Being a victim of his violence. For ruining their anniversary dinner. For damaging his suit. For making a scene. I will not apologize to a man who hit me, I stated firmly. If anyone deserves an apology, it's me from Frank and from you for not defending me. Jason ran his hands through his hair in frustration. You don't get it. That's not how things work in my family. We respect my father's position as head of the family. Does that respect include letting him hit your wife? He didn't really hit you, Jason insisted, his denial deepening. And if you'd just apologize, this whole thing would blow over. I looked at this man I had married, this man I thought I knew, and realized I was looking at a stranger. Or worse, at Frank's son, through and through. I'm going to bed, I said, too emotionally exhausted to continue. We'll talk tomorrow when you've had time to think about what actually happened tonight. But as I lay awake in our bed, Jason sleeping soundly beside me as if his world hadn't just imploded, I knew with growing clarity that no conversation would change the fundamental truth. My husband had failed me in the moment I needed him most. And he would fail me again if given the chance. The next morning, Jason acted as if nothing significant had happened. He made coffee, scrolled through emails on his phone, and mentioned a dinner with clients he had scheduled for the following week. "Did you hear me?" he asked when I didn't respond to his question about whether I could join them. "The Hendersons are important clients. Dad thinks it would make a good impression if you came along." "I'm not going anywhere with your father," I said quietly, cradling my coffee mug with both hands. Jason sighed dramatically. "Are you still on about last night? I told you it wasn't a big deal." Before I could respond, his phone rang. Jason glanced at the screen and his expression changed subtly, a mixture of deference and anxiety I recognized all too well. He answered immediately, turning away from me. "Hi, Dad. Yes, we got home fine." "No, not yet." He glanced at me. "I'm working on it." "I understand." "Yes, sir. I'll let you know." He ended the call and turned to me with a determined expression. "That was Dad. He expects your apology today. In person." Something inside me hardened. "That's not happening. Natalie, be reasonable. You spilled wine on a $5,000 suit. The least you can do is apologize." He hit me, Jason. He physically assaulted me over an accident. I will not apologize to him. Jason slammed his hand on the counter, making me jump. "Why do you have to be so difficult? Just swallow your pride and apologize. That's what being part of a family means. Sometimes you have to compromise." "Compromise?" I repeated incredulously. "Being hit isn't a compromise, it's abuse. And you standing by while it happened and then defending him, that's betrayal." "You're blowing this way out of proportion," Jason insisted. "It was a tap, not a punch." "You're fine." I touched my cheek, which still bore a faint mark. "Would you be saying that if I had hit you? Or if you saw a stranger hit a woman in public? Would that be fine too?" Jason avoided my eyes. "That's different." "How? How is it different?" "Because he's my father," Jason shouted. "Because he gave me everything. Because without him, I wouldn't have my job, this apartment, any of it." And there it was, the truth laid bare. Jason's loyalty wasn't to me, his wife. It was to the man who controlled his career, his finances, his sense of self-worth. "I see," I said quietly. "So this is your final position? I need to apologize to your father for being hit, or else what?" Jason's expression hardened. "Either you apologize or you need to leave. I can't have this tension between my wife and my parents. It's not sustainable." The moment stretched between us, 5 years of marriage balanced on the edge of a knife. In that moment, I saw with perfect clarity what my future would look like if I stayed. A lifetime of diminishing myself to accommodate Frank's ego, of Jason never standing up for me, of raising children in an environment where abuse was excused as just his way. "I'll leave," I said simply. Jason looked shocked, as if he hadn't actually expected me to choose self-respect over our marriage. "You don't mean that?" "I do," I replied, feeling strangely calm. "I deserve better than this." "You're overreacting," Jason insisted. "Take the day to calm down. Think it through. I've made my decision." He left for work shortly after, clearly believing I would reconsider once I was alone. But his departure only strengthened my resolve. I called in sick to work and began packing. It was surprising how few of my possessions felt essential. Clothes, personal documents, jewelry that had been in my family, my laptop and design equipment, a few cherished books and photographs. I left behind the wedding album, the gifts from Frank and Diane, the furniture we had chosen together. Those things belonged to a life I now realized had been built on an illusion. I called Lauren, who answered on the first ring. "Nat? Aren't you at work?" "Frank hit me last night," I said without preamble. "Jason wants me to apologize to him. I'm leaving." There was a brief silence, then, "My spare room is yours for as long as you need it. Do you want me to come help you pack?" I felt a rush of gratitude for my sister's immediate, unquestioning support. "No, I'm almost done. But thank you. Text me when you're on your way. I'll be here." I wrote a short note and placed it on the counter alongside my wedding ring. I deserve better than this. "Don't contact me, I'll reach out when I'm ready to talk." As I carried the last of my bags to my car, our neighbor Mrs. Chin stepped out of her apartment. "Moving out?" she asked, eyebrows raised in surprise. "Just for a while," I replied, not ready to share the full truth. She nodded thoughtfully. I heard shouting this morning. Everything okay? It will be, I said, surprising myself with how much I believed it. The drive to Lauren's apartment was surreal. 5 years of marriage ended in less than 24 hours. I oscillated between doubt, grief, and a strange sense of liberation. By the time I parked outside Lauren's building, tears were streaming down my face, but they weren't entirely tears of sadness. Lauren was waiting at the door. She took one look at my face and pulled me into a fierce hug. You did the right thing, she whispered fiercely. And I'm so damn proud of you. Inside her apartment, Lauren had already prepared the spare room with fresh sheets and cleared space in her closet. On the kitchen counter sat a bottle of wine and 2 glasses. Then she winced, noticing my expression. Too soon for wine, she asked. I managed a weak laugh. Maybe for a few days. Lauren helped me bring in my bags, and we settled on her couch. For the first time, I told the complete story of my relationship with Jason's parents, all the warning signs I had ignored, the gradual erosion of my self-esteem, Jason's increasing deference to his father. I should have seen it sooner, I concluded. Don't do that, Lauren said firmly. This is not your fault. The people who were supposed to love and protect you failed spectacularly. That's on them, not you. My phone had been buzzing throughout our conversation, Jason calling repeatedly, then texting, Where are you? This is ridiculous. Come home. You're overreacting. Dad's really upset. You're ruining everything. Please, let's talk about this. The messages vacillated between anger and pleading. I showed Lauren, who snorted in disgust. Block him, she advised. At least for now. Give yourself space to think without his manipulation. I hesitated, then followed her advice. The immediate silence from my phone felt both terrifying and peaceful. That night, in Lauren's spare room, I experienced my first night of freedom. It was a complex emotional landscape, grief for the marriage I thought I had, fear of an uncertain future, but also a profound sense of relief. I had stood up for myself in perhaps the most significant way possible. The next day, I contacted Mia, a friend from law school who specialized in family law. She agreed to meet me for coffee to discuss my options. Based on what you've told me, you have grounds for a restraining order against your father-in-law, she explained. As for the separation, Washington is a no-fault state, so the process is relatively straightforward. But given Jason's family's resources, you should expect them to make things difficult. What do you mean? Frank Wilson has connections throughout Seattle. Judges, court clerks, other attorneys. He's made donations to half the legal establishments in the city. They might try to delay proceedings, hide assets, or pressure you to accept less than you're entitled to. I hadn't even considered the extent of Frank's influence. So what do I do? Document everything, Mia advised. The incident, Jason's response, any previous concerning behavior. And I'll refer you to a colleague in Tacoma. Outside Frank's immediate sphere of influence. As I began telling close friends what had happened, I received mixed reactions. While most were supportive, some questioned my decision. Are you sure you're not overreacting? Asked Heather, a friend from college. Every marriage has rough patches. He let his father hit me, Heather. That's not a rough patch. But 5 years of marriage, don't you think you should try counseling first? These reactions made me doubt myself momentarily, but Lauren remained my steadfast supporter. People are uncomfortable with women who enforce boundaries, she explained. It makes them question their own choices. Don't let their discomfort undermine your decision. A week after leaving, I had my first night of uninterrupted sleep. It felt like a small but significant victory. 1 week after I left, I was sorting through job applications at Lauren's dining table when someone knocked on the door. Lauren was at work, so I approached cautiously and checked the peephole. Jason stood in the hallway, looking disheveled in a way I had never seen him, unshaven, hair uncombed, wearing a wrinkled shirt. I hesitated, then opened the door but blocked the entrance. What are you doing here? Can I come in? He asked. Please, Nat. I just want to talk. Against my better judgment, I let him in, keeping the door open and maintaining distance between us. You look good, he said awkwardly, taking in my appearance. I had started doing yoga with Lauren every morning, and despite everything, I was sleeping better than I had in months. What do you want, Jason? He ran his hand through his hair, a nervous gesture I once found endearing. I want you to come home. This separation has gone on long enough. It's been a week, I pointed out. Dad's really sorry in his own way, Jason continued as if I hadn't spoken. He won't say it directly, but he mentioned that perhaps he overreacted. Overreacted? I repeated incredulously. He hit me, Jason. That's not an overreaction, it's assault. Jason winced. Can you stop using that word? It makes it sound so much worse than it was. It's the accurate word. And the fact that you're still minimizing what happened tells me nothing has changed. He sat heavily on Lauren's couch. What do you want from me, Natalie? I'm trying here. Are you? Because it sounds like you're still prioritizing your father's feelings over what actually happened. You don't understand, Jason said, his voice dropping. This isn't the first time. I stared at him. What? Dad has. He's always had a temper. When I was growing up, sometimes he would. Jason trailed off, looking down at his hands. He hit you too, I realized, horror washing over me. Jason nodded almost imperceptibly. And Mom. Usually after he'd been drinking. It wasn't often, but when it happened. He shuddered slightly. We never talked about it afterward. That was the rule. In that moment, I felt a complex mixture of emotions, pity for the child Jason had been, disgust at the cycle of abuse he was perpetuating, and certainty that I was making the right decision. Jason, I said gently, I'm sorry that happened to you. Truly. But can't you see you're continuing the pattern? By excusing his behavior, by expecting me to just absorb the abuse and pretend it didn't happen, you're becoming him. He looked up sharply. I'm nothing like him. You're defending a man who hit your wife. What would you call that? Jason stood abruptly. I knew this was a mistake. You've always judged my family, always thought you were better than us. That's not true, I said, but he was already heading for the door. Let me know when you're ready to be reasonable, he tossed over his shoulder. I've filed for a legal separation in the meantime. After he left, I called Mia immediately. She confirmed that Jason had indeed filed for legal separation the previous day. This is actually good for us, she explained. It gives us time to prepare our case. I'm going to connect you with a financial advisor to help protect your assets. The next few weeks were a blur of legal consultations, paperwork, and difficult decisions. I found a small studio apartment I could afford on my salary and signed a 6-month lease. Lauren helped me furnish it with secondhand finds and a few key pieces from her own home. It's not much, I said as we arranged the last of the furniture, but it's mine. It's perfect, Lauren insisted. And it's just the beginning. Frank, true to Mia's prediction, did try to make things difficult. He used his connections to delay court dates and filed motions contesting my right to portions of Jason and my joint assets. More disturbingly, I learned through a colleague that he had contacted my agency's biggest client, suggesting I was unstable and unreliable. Fortunately, my work spoke for itself, and my boss stood by me after I explained the situation. Frank Wilson doesn't intimidate me, she said firmly. Your work is exceptional, and that's all that matters to this agency. Still, the stress took its toll. I lost weight, developed insomnia, and found myself jumping at loud noises. On my sister's recommendation, I started seeing a therapist, Dr. Karen Mitchell. What you're experiencing is a normal response to trauma, she explained during our first session. Both the physical assault and the betrayal by your husband have created a kind of psychological injury. Over the next few months, Dr. Mitchell helped me recognize patterns in my relationship with Jason that I had normalized, how I had gradually diminished myself to avoid conflict, how I had accepted increasingly disrespectful treatment from his parents, how I had lost touch with my own needs and boundaries. The good news, she told me, is that you demonstrated incredible strength by leaving. Many people never take that step. In therapy, I also connected with a support group for women leaving difficult relationships. There I met Audrey, whose story was eerily similar to mine. Her father-in-law had been emotionally abusive, and her husband had consistently taken his father's side. It's like they're still little boys desperate for daddy's approval, she observed during one session. Except we're the ones who pay the price. Audrey became a close friend and ally during the divorce process. She was 6 months ahead of me in her journey and offered practical advice about everything from legal strategies to handling mutual friends who took sides. The division of assets proved complicated. Our apartment had been purchased with a down payment that was a gift from Frank, which Jason's lawyers now argued meant his family had a financial interest in the property. My retirement account, which I had built before our marriage, was safe, but our joint savings became a battleground. Some mutual friends naturally took sides. Madison, who had introduced us, remained neutral but distant. "I don't want to get in the middle," she explained when declining my invitation for coffee. Other friends, particularly those who had witnessed Frank's behavior firsthand, reached out with messages of support. 3 months after leaving, I experienced my first holiday season alone. Lauren invited me to join her for Thanksgiving, but I decided to volunteer at a local shelter instead. "I need to create new traditions," I explained. "Ones that aren't shadowed by memories." Serving meals to those less fortunate provided unexpected perspective. Many of the women I met had left abusive situations with far fewer resources than I had. Their resilience inspired me. For Christmas, I did join Lauren and her boyfriend for a quiet celebration. When I unwrapped her gift, a framed print that read, "Sometimes the bravest thing is to start over," I burst into tears. "Happy tears," I assured her, wiping my eyes. "I think I'm finally starting to believe that." The divorce proceedings continued their slow, grinding course. Jason's initial anger had given way to sporadic attempts at reconciliation, usually after he'd been drinking. "We could try counseling," he suggested during one of his late-night calls. "I miss you, Nat." "I miss who I thought you were," I replied honestly. "But not who you actually are." By the 6-month mark, I had established a new routine. Work, therapy, yoga, occasional dates with friends, and quiet evenings in my small but cozy apartment. The panic attacks had subsided, and I was sleeping through the night more often than not. I wasn't ready to date, though several friends had offered to set me up. "I'm still getting to know myself again," I explained when Lauren suggested introducing me to a colleague. "I need to be completely whole before I consider sharing my life with someone else." What surprised me most during this period was discovering how much of myself I had suppressed during my marriage, opinions I had censored, interests I had abandoned, friendships I had neglected, all in service of maintaining peace with Jason and his parents. As I reclaimed these parts of myself, I began to feel a growing sense of excitement about the future. Not despite being alone, but because of the freedom it represented. 1 year after the wine incident, my divorce was finally finalized. The settlement was fair, largely thanks to my attorney's diligence and evidence I had documented of Frank's behavior and Jason's enabling. I kept my retirement account, received half the equity in our apartment, which Jason decided to sell, and maintained full ownership of my design business, which I had officially established 3 months earlier. My studio apartment had become a true home. Filled with artwork I loved, furniture that expressed my aesthetic rather than conforming to Diane's conservative tastes, and plants that thrived under my care, it represented my independence in physical form. Professionally, I had flourished. After the incident with Frank attempting to influence my agency's client, I decided to take the leap into full-time freelancing. My former boss became my first client, and referrals quickly built a sustainable business. I specialized in branding for women-owned businesses, finding purpose in helping other women establish and grow their independent ventures. The final encounter with Jason came unexpectedly at Madison and Caleb's wedding. I had considered declining the invitation, but decided that avoiding social events for fear of seeing my ex-husband gave him too much power over my life. I wore a red dress, a color Diane had always said was too attention-seeking for me, and attended with Lauren as my +1. Jason was there with a date, a woman who bore a striking resemblance to a younger version of his mother. We managed to avoid each other until the reception was winding down. I was waiting for Lauren to return from the restroom when Jason approached, drink in hand. "You look good," he said, echoing his words from that day in Lauren's apartment. "Thank you," I replied simply. "Congratulations on the Anderson account. Madison mentioned you're leading the project." He nodded, looking surprised at my cordial tone. "Thanks. Your business seems to be doing well too. I saw your design work for that new restaurant downtown." An awkward silence fell between us. "Natalie," he finally said, his voice softer, "I've been in therapy. I should have handled things differently. With Dad, with us, with everything." It wasn't quite an apology, but it was more self-awareness than I had ever heard from him during our marriage. "I'm glad you're getting help," I said sincerely. "Dad had another incident," Jason continued, staring into his drink. "At a company event. There were witnesses this time. The board insisted he step down." "I'm sorry," I said, and meant it. Not for Frank, but for the complicated emotions Jason must be feeling. "Don't be. It's long overdue." He looked up at me. "You were right to leave." "I see that now." Before I could respond, Lauren returned, placing a protective hand on my arm. "Everything okay here?" "Everything's fine," I assured her. "Jason was just leaving." He nodded, seeming to understand that whatever closure this conversation provided was the most either of us would get. "Take care, Natalie." As I watched him walk away, I felt the final threads of our connection severing. Not with anger or regret, but with acceptance. Over the following months, I continued to build my new life. I established firm boundaries with everyone from clients to friends to the occasional dates I finally felt ready to accept. I became vigilant about recognizing red flags in relationships of all kinds, no longer willing to dismiss concerning behavior as just how they are. When I met Kevin, a landscape architect with kind eyes and his own history of setting boundaries with difficult family members, I approached the relationship with cautious optimism. Our connection developed slowly, built on mutual respect and open communication. "I want to know your boundaries," he said during our third date. "What makes you feel safe and respected?" The question brought tears to my eyes, not because it was extraordinary, but because it should have been ordinary all along. The healing journey wasn't linear. There were still days when a raised voice would trigger my anxiety, or when I would catch myself diminishing my needs to please others. But the difference was that I now recognized these moments for what they were: echoes of old wounds that were gradually fading. Looking back on that fateful dinner party from the perspective of someone stronger and wiser, I realized that the spilled wine hadn't ruined my life, it had saved it. That moment of crisis had forced me to confront truths I had been avoiding and to make choices that, while painful, ultimately led to freedom. I am grateful every day for having the courage to leave. For choosing myself when no one else would. For recognizing that being alone is infinitely better than being with someone who doesn't protect you from harm, or worse, excuses those who cause it. If you're watching this and something in my story resonates with you, please know that you deserve respect. You deserve safety. You deserve to be with people who would never make you choose between your dignity and their love. The hardest step is the first one, whether that's admitting there's a problem, reaching out for help, or walking away from a situation that diminishes you. But I promise you, on the other side of that step is a life you might not even be able to imagine right now. One where you are whole, where you are valued, where you are free. Have you ever had to make a difficult choice to protect yourself? Share your story in the comments below. And if this video helped you in any way, please hit the like button and subscribe to support others who might need to hear this message. Remember, sometimes walking away isn't giving up, it's choosing yourself. And that choice might just save your life, as it did mine. Thank you for listening to my story.